Hi, everybody. Hope you're having a great day. It's this delightful little MidCamp here. I'm Sam Boyer. I am, I think, a senior architect at NBC Universal. I've been working with Drupal for 6.5 years now or so. And I'm going to depress you with this story about the Drupal 8 page model because this is not a happy story. This is definitely an advanced talk. Like, if you don't know what a render array is, then you're going to get lost pretty quick. But we will forge ahead. I would recommend, if you have a system here with you, that you follow along. This is up on my GitHub pages because there are a couple of diagrams in here which are probably going to get pretty squinty if you don't. You might be fine, might not.
Is it mobile friendly?
What's that?
Is that mobile friendly?
Is Reveal mobile friendly?
Yes.
Then probably it's a giant JPEG, whatever, that should come back through. So maybe. But this talk is about the page model. Was that? Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, that's right. Y'all kind of have to read this. So I'll talk on this one because all the next slide says is a page model. This is more useful to you. We'll stay here for a minute while I talk. So this talk is about the page model in Drupal 8. That is an ill-defined thing, and I understand that. I'm not talking about, like, you know, certainly not talking about the page content type that we. Do we actually still have that? Did we get rid of that?
That's still there.
It's still there. So yeah.
It's now called standard page.
Oh, I'm super excited by that very important change we made. I'm not talking about that at all. I'm talking about the deep concept that is, what is all of the stuff that goes into an HTML page? What is it and why is it there? Anybody else still need this, or can I move along? Hands, anybody? Moving along. All right. So I'm not talking about models in MVC either. Actually, if anything, what I'm talking about is conceptually more akin to a controller in an MVC paradigm. But really, what I'm talking about is this way that Drupal conceives of and organizes the elements of an HTML page internally. How it pulls all the different pieces together. So think panels or context. What are the pieces of my page? What choices did I make in putting them together? And all that. So this corresponds generally to two different templates. There is the HTML template, now html.html.twig, awesomely named, and page.html.twig. The second HTML is silent, not unfortunately. The second HTML, it's a standard pattern within Twig files that we indicate. It's a standard pattern from Twig that you indicate the type of output that it has in its file name. We don't use Twig to output anything that's not HTML, so in D8, it's redundant to have it there, but in order to maintain with the Twig standard, we have .html.twig as the sort of standard extension. Thus, we have html.html.twig. But this old one really doesn't matter whether it's html.html.twig or html.tpl.php. Conceptually, this is just talking about the big top daddy template here, which is the outermost template that we use to actually produce HTML and the stuff that goes into it. This is part of the page models, certainly not all. It's sparse. There is not a lot of stuff in here, although actually this is pretty much everything in here is subject for fairly meaty discussion as to how we handle it when it comes to a page model. But generally speaking, you know, we've got, like HTML requires, a head tag and a body tag. So inside of the head tag, we have the things that are expected: meta tags, link tags, title tags, optionally style sheets and JavaScript. And yeah, that's the head tag. And then we have the body tag. I have kindly omitted here the fact that we also have classes that we stick on the body based on awkward things that are part of the page. But that's part of the issue that I'm going to be getting at in this talk. But within the body tag, there are three basic parts here. There's page top, page, and page bottom. Does anybody have a laser pointer by any chance?
Yes.
Thought you might be the right nerd in the room. That would be helpful in a bit. But these things, there's not generally a lot that goes into either page top or bottom. Page top used to be populated by overlay. I'll walk around. Page top used to be populated by overlay, but oh, this is fancy. Just like press the button and it goes into
Power buttons or power switches on the left
I
side.
see. Oh my. I feel so special. Oh, and it's green too. All right, page top. Not much usually goes in here. Overlay used to inject its markup into this page top space. And page bottom, again, very little is usually put into there. It's not something which most systems usually interact with. We sometimes put JavaScript assets down there. Ideally, we should always put JavaScript assets down there. There are significant front-end performance benefits to be had from putting the JavaScript at the bottom of the page. Working on that. But really, most of what we know is in the main bit here, page. That's where almost everything that we know that comes from the page.tpl.php goes. We take the string output of that essentially and tuck it into there. So let's see. Yeah, so as for what's in the actual page TPL PHP, there's no way on earth I'm going to put up the 26 different variables and regions on this screen because that would be stupid. But there's a lot, whereas the HTML TPL PHP is relatively trim, there's an enormous amount of data that we actually stick into the page TPL.php, which in and of itself is not a problem. But the issue is that there's really some... we like to joke sometimes at the office that a lot of what we do as software engineers is basically a grown-up version of one of these things is not like the other that we all learned from Sesame Street, which we affectionately abbreviate as utinalto. So essentially, when you look at the page TPL, there's a whole lot of utinalto which goes into the different variables that are there. You have things that come from really, really sort of different scopes. There's like general utility bars, like a base path, but then there's also like navigational elements, and the main menu is injected directly into there. How on earth are like the base path and the main menu reasonable sort of siblings that are going into the same space? This is a symptom of the fact that we jam a lot of differently leveled things into one place, and we just sort of expect the theme system to sort it out. But the point of the exercise, the point of my showing this, is to say that this is, when I talk about the overall page model, it's the stuff that essentially shows up in these two different templates. And I can't really talk about it in any other way that consistently describes it because we have no other way of consistently describing the stuff that actually goes into the page in Drupal 7. So that's really the point and the key of the issue. And the reason why I say we don't have a page model is because we have a bunch of stuff coming from a bunch of different places, and maybe it's used and maybe it's not, but we have very little sense of requirements as to what should be present and what shouldn't. And for those things that are required, like why is there an if switch statement that says, if we're on a page that has a node on it, inject a bunch of classes into the body tag and then do some other weird things and like put sidebar classes. We do very, very strange things that are not consistent with an overall like deep concept of what the elements of our page are. Instead, we have some combination of like deep signal and high-level data that's being thrown at this one template. And that's really a problem because at the end of the day, this is not just a question of like, oh, we can figure it out and our front-enders can figure it out. The issue is that the page model is a governance question. By that I mean, so in any given Drupal site, you actually have your dev team working on it, but the reality is you have thousands of people who have worked on one part of the software or another who are in some way or another, their code is vying for attention inside of this page. It's a very complex interaction space. It's very complex to figure out which data should be present on the page, which data should not be present on the page, and who gets to decide what data is present on the page. So like conventionally, when you learn about building sites with Drupal, you learn, okay, here's the block system, and then, well, you have panels, and then maybe you can use context, and then you have various configurations that you can attach to like the entities that you've configured, and all of these things should sort of end up somehow kind of magically on the page. But that should also work nicely and easily with like devel, which is going to dump stuff somewhere, and then admin menu, which is going to sit up at the top, or the toolbar now. All of these things, they're all interacting inside of the lack of page model. And they're kind of, over time we've sorted it out so that like these things don't really bump into each other very much. There's a loose hierarchy. Like before we had toolbar and core, admin menu was popular enough that if you did something that messed with admin menu, you should probably change your module because admin menu is more popular than your module, and so therefore you have to knuckle under. And this is a really, really bad way to solve programming problems where you rely on the download count and have a human interaction level. Ultimately, we deal with governance in a very poor way when it comes to who makes the choice of what stuff gets onto the page because we don't have better facilities for answering that question. And really the people who end up suffering are the people who actually build sites, because without a proper model, it says, you get to participate here, you get to put this element on, you get to put this element on. It's impossible for us to provide feedback to the user, feedback to people who are actually building sites to say, here's the expectation about you click these blocks into place. This is the entire set of stuff that actually shows up. Or, feedback, there's a number of different things that I'll get to later that we actually get from having a page model. But ultimately, when we don't answer this question, people who build sites get their expectations violated all the time. Oh, I installed a new module, and all of a sudden some things are working differently. There's nothing that really announces that because this module just got to hook in and change things kind of however they want. It makes for a very complex, very difficult to debug situation. And often enough you can run along with Drupal sites and not really run into this. That's good when that happens. This, however, is why Drupal does not scale particularly well into highly complex situations. And I have a graph that unfortunately is not in this presentation, which I maybe should put in. But it graphs coolness of shit versus level of effort, effort and skill. And like Drupal lets you rise to this level pretty quickly with relatively low effort and skill. But to actually scale up to really high levels of cool shit, you have to have very, very high levels of expertise to understand how all the different pieces are interacting, because it does not scale that well into complexity, unlike some frameworks. So from here, what I want to do is I want to talk much more concretely, because this is sort of exposition that may or may not make any sense because it's quite abstract. So I want to talk much more concretely about the way that Drupal 7's page model works, and then talk about the way that Drupal 8's page model works, where we have made advances and where we haven't. So Drupal 7 to start with. Really, this is the key thing. Hook page build and hook page alter make everything squishy. They are the bane of my existence, and I want them to die a fiery death. These are the granddaddy master of render array functions. Hook page build is invoked. It is the very outermost of the render array builders. And then once hook page build is invoked to build up the giant render array, hook page alter is invoked to pass it out. And anybody can modify the final page output. And Jeff, I know you were deeply involved in the original decision to put this in, so maybe you can correct me. But as I recall,
Let's just put it this way. I'm an atheist now.
There you go. It's good. It's good. The original justification.
God would not allow our page model to exist.
What's that?
The loving God would not allow D7's page model to exist.
That's a good way to put it. The original justification for this, and this is a classic problem with Drupal, right? Like, alters are an amazingly powerful tool for people building sites. They're great because you can reach in and you have, like, assuming there's a good alter in the right place, you have razor level control. You don't have to hack other people's code. You can change all this stuff. They are the shittiest tool in the world for facilitating collaboration across multiple contrib authors who don't know what anybody else is doing. It's fantastic when you are using it as a scalpel for your purpose. It's terrible when you are trying to build a system that interoperates cleanly and nicely with other systems. It's just basically everybody, I don't know, running into a mosh pit with a blindfold and a machete and hoping that things work out. Like it's lovely. But so the original justification for this, one of them at least, was you want to insert an add after comment number 7. And I guess we thought that that was a really convincing use case for that thing, because that's something I do all the time. And so then this went in and such and stuff. So the other piece that's an issue is a number of the globals that we have. Drupal add CSS, Drupal add JS, Drupal get HTML head, everything that deals with, if you remember back to, going back quickly to this, a lot of the stuff that fills in the top part here, this additional metadata here, pretty much all of that stuff in Drupal 7 is contained inside of globals. And that blows up encapsulation. Encapsulation not only gets us things like much nicer testing, but it also allows us to perform meta work on our site to do things like much smarter asset aggregation strategies. Caching, yes. Yeah, blowing up encapsulation really blows up caching. We've got some more sophisticated ways around the caching issues, but whereas we've devised some sort of specific ways to kind of make caching work, notwithstanding the mess, but we can't do any of the other types of the meta operations that we might like to without having encapsulation. We would have to build similar parallel systems to caching to be able to reach into and out of the mess, and it's not great. So this is the part where it gets squinty, like I said. But this is Drupal 7's page processing model, and I'm going to run us through this relatively quickly so that you have a concrete sense of what we're actually talking about here. So first, request comes in. It goes into Bootstrap. That super almost happened. It goes into Bootstrap, and look at my phone. Sorry, super dead. It goes into Bootstrap. Drupal bootstraps itself. It loads all resources, system resources, stuff like that. Gets to the routing system, known in Drupal 7 as the menu system, which goes into the list of callbacks that have been declared, your hook menu implementations, reads those in and looks at the incoming request, figures out which actual page callback should be fired based on that request. So it routes off and fires your page callback, wherein we do callback stuff, whatever that happens to be. If that's one of your custom page callbacks, it's whatever you defined. If it's one of the built-in ones, it's that. But ultimately, the responsibility of the callback is to produce a render array. If a render array is not produced, then we just take the string and we put a render array around it with the string value as hash markup, I believe. As soon as we're done with that, then the render array, the routing system passes the render array back along to this function called Drupal deliver page. So Drupal deliver page is, there's an important point of indirection here. There's something called a delivery callback. Has everybody ever actually used the delivery callback? Right, that's about the set of hands that I expected to see. Actually, more than I expected. Congratulations, you guys are statistical anomalies. You can use the delivery callback to alter the actual function that's called to process the page callback's render array, which actually looks an awful lot like what we'll see in D8 in many ways. But it's almost never used. Like Panels does not use it. As far as I know, Context does not use it. The major page building systems that are out there right now don't utilize this. We continue operating through the system as it exists now. So the default way, the default delivery callback that's called is Drupal deliver HTML page, which is the thing that then does this work. It decorates the render array using hook page built and alter. The battle lines are there. It fires these two, so it fires hook page build and alter, passing along the render array that was produced by your page callback, sending it along to anybody who wants to chime in, including, most importantly, for example, the block system. And there are a couple of other hook page build implementations in core as well. But this is the way that blocks actually make it onto the page, is they participate through hook page build, and they inject themselves right on. So once that's done, it is passed off through Drupal render. The complete page array here is passed to Drupal render, which evaluates it in that crazy, recursive, crawling, spidering, fun fashion that Drupal render does its thing, ultimately, though, arriving into the theme system, which is to say that it takes the giant render array that is there, and it translates it into variables, passes them into the theme system, pre-process functions first, and then along with templates, which ultimately all results in an HTML output string that's passed back to Bootstrap and ultimately back out to the client. So the real problem, like I said, is here. This is where our page model truly lives. Up to this point, all we've dealt with is the one thing that's been defined as happening at this route. It's not the entire page. That's just the route contents. This is where we stick all of the extra stuff around it that constitutes the broader page. This is the governance area. I mean, just think about this, right? Like, there's one callback here. This isn't that complicated necessarily. You can make it complicated, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that complicated. One thing implements the callback. One thing actually responds. You have one response back. It's a much simpler part of the system because there's no fan out. But here, we fan out like crazy, first with the build and then with the alter. And we let anybody participate in any way that they want and add whatever they want to the page. So that is where all the complexity comes in, and that's where we potentially step on each other's toes when we implement these different hooks, and we create these complex overlaps and create all the risk in the system. So this is 7. Any quick questions about this before I move on? Because it's a bunch. Yeah.
You mentioned the panels doesn't really change the page delivery callback.
Correct.
But it does impose a much more explicit model.
Yes.
Of what makes up the page and what can go into the page.
Completely from here.
Right. It basically says, I will do all of the stuff at this callback, and we will agree to not bother wrapping me in anything.
Pretty much.
Using a theme that doesn't provide any other regions. And inside of that callback step, it does its own page governance stuff. But
yep.
By combining it with a theme that added a bunch of other stuff, you could then just put nodes in your nodes, because we heard you like nodes.
Exactly, and Exhibit would be proud, and the rest of us would want to shoot ourselves in the face. But yeah, that is absolutely the issue. Like conceptually, what Jeff's saying, like we have panels implements its entire model up here, right? It says we're gonna all of its concepts, all the configuration that you do when you work with panels, all of it is expressed here, and all that is built by the time that we actually make it here. So panels, in order for it to function, just implicitly assumes that nobody else is doing anything crazy in here, which is exactly why stuff blows up, because other people do crazy things in there. And sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't. But that's the way in which we lack a model. Panels made this big, complicated model up here, and it can't actually control things down at this level, so it has to operate higher up.
And it also means that we have multiple parallel ecosystems and solutions for certain kinds of problems that can't work together.
Correct, exactly. Now, technically, panels could be a dick and take over the delivery callback here and say, no, we're going to use our own custom one. We're not going to call hook page build, hook page alter. We're just going to turn off all that other stuff. But that's a level of responsibility that Panels doesn't really want to take, at least not the core system. Panels everywhere works differently. But yeah, it is more than any one contrib module. Even for Earl and me, that's too arrogant for us to say that we want to just override everything and all of the things. And I don't know, arrogant. Really what it's actually saying is I don't want the responsibility of having to solve every other problem that's solved in this space here, because there are other problems that are solved. Like, really, do I want to make it so that like admin menu can't do its thing? That's a terrible idea, you know. Toolbar can't do its thing. There are sort of legitimate uses in there which we need to work with, which is sort of the big summation of the problem, right? Like this, like I said before, this makes it all squishy. Anything can happen. The problem is the sort of contract implied by this whole space here. We have a giant monolith that from the outside is impenetrable. We have to let all those contracts exist because there are some good use cases and some bad use cases. We can't just sort of say turn it all off and expect things to work. But
all those contracts are implicit and maintained by convention, not by anything that actually is enforced.
Right, which is so it's just giant, you know, graveyards full of discovery to figure out what the right solution is here. Okay, Drupal 8. So another one. Now, who's heard of the kernel? Show of hands. All right, so that's going to be actually, I don't know. Maybe people won't really have to worry about the kernel, but
I will.
I worry about everything. So a kernel is a product of the fact that we've switched over to Symfony as our base system. The kernel is a concept from Symfony. It is a class that is like a system kernel responsible for dispatching, basically taking requests in from other parts of the application and routing them across to their appropriate executor. It's a handler for these things. It's a pass-through. You attach services to it. It executes those services. It runs through handling incoming requests for the most part. It can handle other things, but it's a kernel. Send it a request. It sends you back a response. So the new system, the kernel, takes the incoming request, sends it off to the routing system. Routing system has been totally rewritten, and it's completely done and like sparkling clean now. Absolutely, right?
Certainly more so than D7.
There you go. So a routing system, in the same way, it figures out something akin to, more or less akin to the page callback, the controller, which it then sends back to the kernel. A ton of services are executed that do a lot of different things, which are not really relevant for our discussion right here, right now. But ultimately, then, we get along to the controller, and the kernel dispatches to the controller in much the way that the old menu system dispatched to the page callback. And then here's the first big shift. As of the patch that Larry and co got in back in late January, early January, the expectation, not the requirement, but the expectation is that the controller should return something, a little thing called an HTML fragment. So it will rapidly become clear that the exact identity of what an HTML fragment is inside of the system is a matter of some open question. But
is it a fragment of HTML?
Let's say yes. There's what it does, and then there's what it is. It's kind of part of the problem. So in any case, we respond back from the controller with this HTML fragment. That goes back to the kernel. I will not show you the specific sublogic that happens here, but I will just note to say that this sort of whole thing that we're looking at here, this is not the way that the kernel works, period. This is the way that we have constructed it to work in an HTML context. When other types of requests come in, the processing here can look fairly different. And we're really just talking about HTML here. So HTML fragment comes back from the kernel, sent along to one of the various subscribers, specifically the HTML view subscriber. This then, and I put this in a little dotted line here because this represents another important indirection point. This indirection point is almost completely analogous to the delivery callback. This is a spot where you can swap out essentially a different page model. So, the delivery callback in D7 said, hey, you can put in a different HTML model that doesn't have hook page build and alter. Well, in pretty much the exact same way, we have the default HTML page renderer, which is called by the HTML view subscriber with the HTML fragment, at which point this should look familiar. Hook page build and alter is called again. They still exist. We have not killed them. So this is the point at which it starts feeling like a little bit of a lateral move from what we had in D7. The fragment is passed in. We call hook page build and alter with the fragment as part of that array that's passed around. That's right. That's how we do it right now.
That's not actually how. You're missing a step in here. At least
which
that's
one?
The last time I looked at this code, HTML page.
No. Well, that's created by the. Where's that created?
HTML page isn't in this diagram.
It's created by this or by this? Which one? I was just looking at this. Hang on. Let me pull it up. Intermission. 1 moment.
There's another object in the middle there that you're not referring to. It's bridged from HTML view subscriber. There's another service in there.
I think that's the. There's the default HTML fragment renderer.
That one. That's what you're missing.
This is why it's fun to be still working on this stuff. Yeah, I have it here. Okay. That does. And that's called by this thing, which passes along to that thing, which does default HTML. Oh, that's cute. Yeah, with 2 layers. All right. Well, this is kind of right. More or less right. There is a little bit more of interchange in here, though, the way that we actually pass things back and forth between this. The important thing to really understand there, though, is what the HTML fragment is kind of supposed to be versus what the HTML page is supposed to be. Long, long ago, in San Francisco far, far away, we talked about the idea that what we should really want to have as a sort of baseline for this illustrious page model was we should strive to have all of the top-level elements inside of the page be really well-defined objects. Essentially, what HTML fragment is supposed to be. We'll no longer have any random piece of content that comes from here or there, wherever else, no altering, no injecting, no whatever else, just a clear system by which if you want a top-level element, it's not wrapped up in some other top-level element, then it needs to produce a consistent interfaced thing, which is what the HTML fragment is sort of trying to be. The HTML page, then, is the assembly of all of these fragments together into the overall page. This is the basic idea behind the page model that we're sort of trying to shoot for, ideally shooting for. What we actually have, though, at the moment, is something where we have an HTML fragment come back from the controller, and then we pass it along through a couple of these different services that I have lined up incorrectly here. And we then call out to hook page build and alter still, which is how blocks still inject things. And then there is a patch open, which we pretty much, Mark Sonnenbaum and I pretty much deep sixed, to make it so that we get rid of the block page build, and we deep sixed it because it's yet more just completely lateral move, basically. It makes a block return the HTML fragment by putting another weird, bizarre layer of indirection in there that has no value or meaning inside of the system whatsoever. It just complicates things further. So we do hook page build and alter. We pass along the page array with the HTML fragment. It goes to Drupal render. We have made some wins here. Instead of having all of the call out to like Drupal, I think we still have Drupal get HTML head, but we've taken care of at least some of the things that were globally kept, and we instead embed them on the HTML page. Pass that along and out to Drupal render. That goes out to the theme system, which does this sort of thing that we're all generally familiar with. Preprocessors, then off the twig templates, and then that final HTML string is passed back, which is then wrapped up into a response object, Symfony's concept, passed back to the kernel, which is ultimately sent back to the client. So that's the basic picture of what we have now. And fundamentally, this still remains the problem. This is the page model right here. And it's still the same page model as what we've always had. It doesn't help us with any of these problems of coordination and governance that we've had for so long. So this is a quick look at a simplified version of HTML fragment, just to give you a sense of what it actually does. You can get content from it or get title from it. This cuts out some rather key methods on it, namely that there's a set title and set content method on it. And this contributes to its sort of confusing identity. We basically use HTML fragments right now as like a data condom to pass around through the system. They're a bundle of values. They're kind of just an object version of a render array. Larry and I and a few others have had a number of conversations about resolving what they should actually look like over the past few months. Not terribly satisfying conversations. But this is what we have now, that there are these methods which get this fundamental information back. HTML page, I should have extends HTML fragment there for clarity. Some more specific version of a fragment that actually has these additional, as well as some other methods. But again, this is intended to be illustrative. This goes back to all the way back to the beginning. Actually, the HTML template file. What are the HTML attributes? What are the body attributes? Status code to go back to the response, what's the HTTP status code that we're actually sending back. That kind of thing is all encoded on the HTML page. But even having those things, as I've been saying, we haven't actually solved the governance problem. We haven't made it any easier for any of the individual modules to say, I know what is on this page. There's the really key thing here, and this is what my sort of half my initiative was trying to do. The Scotch initiative, now axed, was say, I would really like to have, for a model, a data object thing that describes all the things that will be on a page, even if I'm not on that page. Today, it is impossible for us to reliably say from a back-end page, what will this front-end page look like? We can sort of like mock up the request as best we can, but because we have all of these different ways that things can interact and change all this stuff at runtime, we can't actually figure that out reliably, which means that we cannot do meta operations on any route and do anything predictably and have it actually be assured to be correct in every case. We can build these layers which are right most of the time, but most of the time is where high consultancy bills live. So we still haven't actually solved this governance problem. We don't have a clear way for things to make their way into this page model, a way for them to declare the fact that they're in there. But most importantly, I used to describe this as the difference between a push versus a pull system. Right now, blocks push themselves onto the page. They make that decision independently. They're capable of it because of the way that that hook works. A formal page model is one that says it's going to pull from the middle. It's an object that says, I'll get you, 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 and all the individual things that it pulls in are fundamentally inert. They're not making an independent decision about whether or not to show up on the page. It is up to the central controller to figure that out. And when you have a central controller that can figure it out, we can give reliable information to users in the interface. We can figure out caching things better. We can do all manner of meta operations better. And meta is a really, really good thing. It lets us work in layers. When folks who understand the system really well can write something that works 100% of the time because the signals are good, the model is good, it makes everybody else's job a lot easier. A lot easier. We can solve problems centrally instead of having to sort of go through giant heaving effort to make it happen. So, right, this is the final goal. Princess is the name of a branch that, because we thought it was cute, we named it that in the Scotch repository, which I started pushing stuff into last year. And if anything happens, then we'll have a contrib project named Princess, which does most of the things that we want here. I've been talking a lot with the context folks and Display Suite as well about personally what I would like to see is, again, this object that sits in the middle, right? The page objects, a formal thing which we can actually, write out to config that says ahead of time, this is all the stuff that's on the page. Have that be inviolately true. There's a bunch of stuff that has to change. For example, like the concept of a block needs to be radically reduced in its minimum scope in order for that to work. For people to be able to inject things onto the page in the way that they do now, and if everything that's injected onto the page has to be a block to be formally declared, then blocks have to become simpler in order for the things that people do now, in order for that to work, for people to be able to reasonably inject blocks in this way. So there's scope concision that has to happen there, and a bunch of other things. But there would be this, ideally, there would be this base model, this base display, because, we use that word because it's not at all an overused word already in Drupal, and we thought it was good to use new words. So we want to have this base display concept, which could easily be shared between context and panels. There can be different interaction paradigms, that's fine, but still ultimately everybody comes back to, instead of figuring everything out at runtime, you figure it out ahead of time. This is pretty much analogous to the shift, if y'all were around for it, between D5 and D6. Where in D5, hook menu was checked on every page request. Like it built the whole routing system by reading in PHP on every single request, and it was really slow. But you had this, if not make hash section where you could do all kinds of crazy dynamic stuff. And then in D6, we changed it so that hook menu was read at cache clear time, and all of it was written to the database, and it got much faster because we pre-cached all of it, and we could do predictive things around routing. Same principle here, except now what we're talking about is the entirety of the contents of the page. So that's basically it. Questions? Eden.
So, again, using panels as an analogy here.
Yeah.
Like, panels is not an uncontroversial module.
Not at all.
I think like the basic page model that it provides, it still involves people basically creating layouts.
Let me see if I can anticipate your issue. So, because it'll be even sweeter if I can do that, right? As I see it, after years of maintaining panels, like a lot of the fundamental issue with it, it's like the polar opposite of blocks, right? Blocks, you go and you configure, and it's for your whole site, and it's just done for all the different pages, and then you put in some exclusionary rules. Panels says, I have one thing, which is used for maybe it's one URL, or if the thing has been built, it's on top of one node type or a couple, but you have to do all this complicated clicking around in order to get this one thing that I built in order to map onto my IA easily and cleanly. And that fundamentally puts it in a position where it's really kind of a crappy like IA expression model because there's enough moving parts that you often have 17 different variants or whatever it is to try to express a single underlying concept. And then you have to have all the 17 different variants that you update by hand, and you're missing the like actual thing, the underlying thing that is some of the common underlying patterns between them, and you have to, it's all that kind of thing. Is this the sort of direction that you're going?
Yeah, I think that's one of the big things. It's
okay. What else?
Yeah.
That one? All right.
That's the one.
So we've modeled a solution to this problem, essentially, which is to say that we've designed an inheritance mechanism between displays. And the idea was that
site-wide display that handles a lot of your common IA and organizational stuff, and then you can start mapping overrides onto that.
Pretty much. The idea was a master display. Concept was that you would install Drupal and there'd be some like a master front end, master back end, something like that. They're not tied to themes. And
thinking about aggregating the kinds of elements that are there.
Yep.
And the theme's responsibility is styling them, wrapping them in markup and stuff like that.
Yeah. There's a whole bunch of additional stuff we were exploring with regards to a better concept for regions and a better concept for themes to be able to express some information back into the UI as it pertains to a couple things. But with respect to this particular flow is really master displays, which you declare a persistent inheritance relationship with from a child. It's not actually an override because when you update the master, it propagates to the child. There is no multiple clicking. Like you update in one place, and all the 40 things that inherit from it automatically receive that because at runtime, it evaluates the inheritance relationship. So that was, I mean, honestly, I think that it's still not perfect. There are still some edgy things that you have to deal with, but it really truly can handle that. Like you can have your cake and eat it too. You can have your highly customized single situation at the same time as you have your broad global controls. Yeah, Larry.
So if you've got that designed, how come it never materialized?
Well, I was told that certain resources at certain companies were allocated elsewhere and that we were going to have a release last summer. So, yeah. So I diverted my effort over to focusing specifically on the assets question, which has turned into its whole giant, long, snaky thing, which I haven't made progress on in a few months, unfortunately. But so my focus went over to there, and it's been sitting. Other questions? Yeah.
One of the things I saw in the Drupal 7 page model is that it kind of focuses on one thing happening per page load.
Yeah, I'm hiding the fact that actually a lot can happen in multiple requests. Is that what you mean, the multiple requests coming back in and through?
There's one kind of page callback.
Yeah.
But there are actually a lot of different things that happen on a page. Like when you visit a page, like there are a lot of things that are contextual to that page that might be pulled in, and they're being pulled in when building the page rather than kind of as a core action of
Right, right.
Do services change that at all in Drupal 8? Like, or is it still kind of focused on that one kind of central fragment?
Well, it depends. It depends on the specific thing. Like in D8 right now, as I recall, pretty much every actual browser request results in at least 3 requests back to Drupal if you're logged in. One is for contextual links, and another is for something else. I can't remember.
The other 2 are cache client-side local storage.
There you go.
That's only for admins. If you're
right.
not an admin, those aren't welcome.
So there you go. Well, contextual links, whether you're an admin or not, like they have to be served with an additional request. Yes, they do have to be served with an additional request.
There's no JavaScript firing, so those aren't happening. Or there's no callback for them.
To have contextual links, this is the way that we dodge the entire caching problem, is we send out tags which are interpreted by the JavaScript that we send out to make a secondary request in order to actually evaluate the contextual links and put them into place. So if you have access to contextual links, then that request has to happen. Yeah. Right, which certainly means if you're an admin, just not only if you're an admin. So I'm sorry, I got distracted. Can you rephrase your question again so that I can get it?
So when you flip forward to Drupal 8, the Drupal 8 page
yeah.
processing, there's still that kind of build HTML fragment that happens, which is that kind of central piece. What about like building other parts of the page? Like, is there a way to pull that out of kind of the page build as a whole? Like, is that kind of part of? Can
you give me an example of another part of the page you have in mind? That's not a block, I assume you mean?
So say like if your page shows like your username and a little like user image up in the top corner, like that is something that happens on your page. It's
right.
kind of contextual to like what page you're on, whether you're logged in, blah blah. But it's kind of lumped into the page rendering as a whole, even though it's like something that's built that's specific to that.
Right. No. I mean, it makes sense. I feel like the most satisfying way that I can answer that is to say there are a couple different levels at which like a particular problem like that one I think would be solved.
Well, it's like a side effect right now, rather than being,
Right. Right. Yeah. No. It's when you say side effect, you mean it's happening through the indirected hook-based process and sort of tossing itself on.
Yeah, it's a side effect of the fact that like you're logged in as a user. It's not like I don't know.
No, well, I think you're right, but the key thing is that side effect is happening here, right? Something probably either inside of it has its own hook page build implementation, or it's attached to some other hook invocation that is off of something's hook page build implementation, and there's some logic in there that reaches out to the global context and say, hey, am I this user and am I on this route or whatever, and then chooses to throw something onto the page array, basically. And that is the hard question to answer. Like that is why this is what's so hard to do, and why what I was saying before about how like the complexity of the block model needs to be reduced such that if this thing is a top-level thing that has been using hook page build, instead it's feasible for it to declare a block that's going to go into the right place, and block has to be a much lighter concept for that to work effectively for that case. Alternatively, if it's embedded inside of something else, if it's not directly implementing hook page build, then that thing has to go through the same process, become a block, declare itself, be pushed out in some way for this to work. And this is like we got in a really snarly problem with. Do I have a local set up right now? Let's see. Excuse me. Really? You can give me that? Crap. Come on. Do I have this? No. What do I call it? Yeah, it's not going to work. The logo and slogan and title. There is an open issue which is painful. Like by this rule, right? If every top-level element has to be a block, that means logo and slogan and site title are each blocks, which is horrible. This is a horrible idea, but it's a tricky one to actually solve well in the system we have now. Like what the current patch proposes, and it may still be going forward, which makes me sad, but okay, sure, solve problems with the system we have. But it's pushed us to this point where like we're making up regions which are designed only to ever house the one block that is named like logo. And we have like a logo region, which is insanity. It is the exact opposite of what regions should be for. It doesn't matter that regions collapse if nothing's in them. It's a bad model. Why would we have a region specifically for one block? It's poor pairing. The way that that issue solves the problem right now is it says, well, let's just have the site logo and the slogan and the title all be one block together, and then kind of subtly design the HTML to really just work with one theme system, because of course, if you have the three of those compacted together into one block, then your theme can't tease them apart and choose where to put the individual elements. And so it's that kind of push and pull that gets to be a lot of a problem. But did that answer enough of your question? You have a sense of how this shapes out in the new system? A little bit, yeah. These are the questions that have to be answered. This is why it's hard. Like we've created a lot of technical debt by having these, like I was saying, these utinalto situations in our page TPO where having really, really different leveled stuff and really different level decisions being made in one place, trying to make a more formal system out of it, we have a lot of pain to actually make that conversion because we need to figure out more consistent places to make all of those decisions that have previously been thrown into one spot. Jeff?
Is it realistically possible to make those kinds of decisions at a system level rather than a design level?
I don't think so. Which is why I would really like to see a reduction in the scope of responsibility for what is done in core, and not necessarily as aggressive as what's been talked about in the past, but simple things like, let's actually let it be okay, like that, you know, let's have some more formal distinction between blocks that are really intended to be reusable versus like meeting the it looks okay when you install it goal, something like that.
WordPress, I mean, you know, God save me, I'm MidCamp, and I'm about to refer to WordPress as an example. But like in that system, the theme really takes on a much larger swath of responsibility for organizing the presentational aspects of the page that we tend to treat it as like the Play-Doh fun factory through which your data gets squeezed. And it doesn't really make decisions, it just applies certain rules.
That really goes to the fundamental philosophical question that has been the bane of our existence for the entirety that I've been in Drupal. Is our primary audience people who push buttons, or is it people who know what an HTML tag is? We cannot design a system that serves both to the full extent. That is simply an intractable problem.
Or can we? And also, actually, hang on.
If you can prove me wrong, please do something.
No, I will. I have a theoretical point in that direction, which I do not think is convincing, but I think is interesting to ponder. But I also have to point out that, Jeff, you earlier professed to be an atheist, so if you're looking for God to save you about talking at WordPress, this thing, you already know that you're out of luck there.
It's been a tug of war for a long time, and
there are
very, very strong opinions on both sides of that, as well as very strong opinions trying to come up with a third and failing.
So here's an alternative way of thinking about that page model object that I was talking about earlier. It's actually a template. Crazy. But I can completely picture, and we discussed this some time ago, and I still can picture it if we could ever get there. This page model, right? It says, I've got a bunch of blocks. They go in certain regions. They have certain configuration. That actually is something that we could express entirely as a twig template. So it would be possible for us to consider like the canonical representation form of one of these display objects as actually a twig template. And technically, if you can go one way, you can try to go the other way, which means that if you have a formal page model, it is theoretically possible. Now, I would put this in the camp of this is not going to work for every case. It would be way too complex to try to actually design that. But it would be the kind of thing which you, like as a shop, could opt into working with. We're going to go like template-led on this, or we're going to go clicky-led on this. And it's relatively easy to have one be in charge and write their way back to the other one. So what you put in templates on disk can show up in a drag-and-drop interface over here, and or what you do over here can be written out to templates on disk. And you won't be able to just constantly work in one or the other, but you could probably say, all right, for the initial phase of the project, we're going to have like people mock up stuff in Twig, and then it writes out to these display objects, which then can be configured by the interface. There was another question over here first, or was that a direct follow-up to what I just said?
That was just a comment. It would be like our content type build out and then basic features
Yeah, it will hopefully be less painful than that, thanks to CMI, but who knows? Really all I mean to say, though, is that while I totally think that it would be fraught, like, if nothing else that I've said about why a page model would be a good idea tickles you, then consider that to be one of them. It is 100% within at least the theoretical domain of possibility that we could go from templates to displays and displays to templates if we had a page model. Question back here.
So is that inheritance-based layout concept,
Yeah.
where you have master layout, which can then have sub-layouts, that kind of thing, which sounds really, is that something that is now the focus of the Princess project, or is that something that's more long term?
That would be, if Princess would ship, that would be 1.0 required.
So it's fundamental.
Yes, absolutely fundamental.
What that project's all about.
Yeah, I could not at all picture shipping Princess without having it there. It would not make any sense without it. You would have this, you'd have a proliferation of the same proliferation of panels that you have now. You would have this proliferation of the Princess displays, and then worst of all, like, we'd have no upgrade path to figure out how to put it. It'd be a nightmare to not have that. But frankly, actually, it's not that complicated. Like, that code is written. That code works on Princess when I had it working last year. That particular piece is not that hard.
It's just a matter of it being in the contrib space.
Well, yeah, but fortunately, I was listening to my presentation when I gave this presentation a little while ago, and my first thought was, my gosh, that guy knows an awful lot more about this than I do. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to do this, but totally lost my train of thought. What was the last thing you said again? Sorry.
I said that it's just a matter of that being in the contrib space, the current state.
Right. So somebody asked something about this last time. Said, it's like, he said, wait, so this thing here, right? There should really only be one of those, right? Yeah, there really should. But it's service, and like any other subscriber service, we can swap it out, right? You sure can, or you can add another one. You sure can. Well, what are we supposed to? Don't do that. That's the answer. You can do so much from contrib. You can blow this whole ship up from contrib on a level and to a degree that is completely unprecedented. So Princess can do everything that it needs to from contrib. And it could be something that modules would opt into saying, yeah, I'm going to go the Princess way. You can effectively maintain a fork inside of contrib. And modules can choose to work with that. But it's really just going to be a question of how much people want to run off the reservation with that kind of thing. Larry, real quick, I saw yours first.
So default HTML page renderer and the default fragment renderer,
Yep.
both of those services were put in there pretty much exactly to do that.
Right. No, I'm with you. You're supposed to swap this one out, but you can swap that one, which is a terrible idea. Swapping this one out is the intended goal. But still, this is a single slot situation, right, where you're supposed to just have one of these. You can make this blow up and go weird in all sorts of creative and interesting ways. This one does encapsulate it in such a way that you can't really stack much on top of it. The inputs and outputs mean by the time the next thing has the bite of the apple, the thing's already been processed, so that's good. But yeah, what's your question?
It's from 30,000 foot view. This really seems like you're talking about distributions. Like, we can hack core without hacking core. I mean, isn't that a good thing?
Yeah, it is. Unless you look at our history of being really quite bad at managing points of conflict around, like, it's competition over a single slot, right? Like, context and panels have had this historical competition over what the page model conceptually is. And we now have so many more single slots to fight over. So maybe we'll get better at handling it because we have to do it more consistently, or maybe it'll just be terrible and we're going to have a giant ecosystem of really incompatible contrib stuff. I don't know.
It's not like people on a daily basis are going to say, you know what, I want to go back to the template way. Oh no, I want to go back to this other way. There is a level of commitment that takes place.
Yeah.
That people have to go.
There is.
I don't think the problem is so much that a given person or a given shop is going to try to jump around from one way to another, but rather that it introduces the possibility that multiple silos of ways of solving problems could start to evolve. Like we have the like what you mentioned, the context and the panels paths, for a number of years in Drupal, there are really sort of independent ecosystems of ways of solving similar problems.
Yep.
And there are a lot more points where those kinds of, you could choose one way or another, excuse me, you could choose one way or another splits could evolve. Not necessarily meaning, oh, you've got to juggle all of them, but the work towards a unified goal of solving, as many different use cases as possible could end up getting fragmented across those.
And in the talk that I hope gets reconsidered for DrupalCon, called Stop Complexity, I mean, I talk about this specific kind of thing, right? Like a lot of the cost of working with Drupal, I think anyway, is associated with the fact that it's actually almost easier in the big panels context case, right? Because that's a big ticket item. We sort of know about that. That's one of the big divergences that you learn about as somebody who works in the Drupal ecosystem. But this is going to introduce so many more little places that things can bump into each other in a way that could be really destructive, but that you don't know about because everybody's just sort of doing their own thing, and you bump in and it doesn't report anything clearly. Oh, I took over this slot, and the other thing was trying to take over that slot, and I didn't know that it wasn't happening, and then something starts happening weird, and how the hell do you debug that problem? Like, it's the complexity that comes from so many different things with so many different possible touch points. It's like an n-by-n matrix problem. I have 100 modules installed, and each one of them has 10,000 possible touch points with every other module in the system. Every single hook, every single event represents a possible complexity touch point. So the more of them that you have and the more control that each of those touch points has, the more overall complexity there is in the system. It may not result in anything. It's risk. It's not a guarantee of anything blowing up, but it is risk and complexity that comes from it. So, yeah.
We're out of time. Let's grab a ball.
Sure. Thanks, everybody.